J.K. Rowling is transphobic. That's it. That's the video. Alright, chill. I'm obviously just joking. But J.K. Rowling has made it abundantly clear what she thinks of trans folks by now. She's been tweeting suspiciously turpy shit for over half a year now, so it's not like this is anything new. But since us trans people didn't really have any damning evidence, it was pretty easy to not only make excuses for her, but to completely miss these red flags and gaslight the entire trans community. Her defending a blatant transphobe and retweeting transphobic shit was made out to be a debate. Well, until now. I guess Rowling herself was also sick and tired of being misunderstood, because she decided to clear up any misunderstandings one could have by doubling down on every bad take she's ever had about trans people ever, while adding some new fuel to the fire. Like, pop off, sis. Then pop back on cause girl, you sound stupid. Yes, I'm referring to her essay which she wrote on her website detailing why exactly she's speaking out on sex and gender issues. I'm not gonna sit here and take the time to go through her entire essay debunking all of her bullshit claims, especially when there's plenty of people more educated than I who have already done so. But even though I'm not going to give you a rundown of how exactly J.K. Rowling is Voldemort if he had a nose, Twitter, and a Bible filled with transphobic propaganda, there are some things that she says in a rather interesting way that I figured that I would address and turn into a teachable moment. Trans men are often overlooked in conversations about, well, everything. From bathroom bills to policy to the media, trans men, along with NBs, are kinda left in the back seat. We're there, but not really acknowledged as mommy and daddy in the front scream at each other. Though I heard people say it's because we're more widely accepted, I think that Rowling's essay and the support that it got from trans folks kinda debunks that on its own. It serves as a reminder that unless we're performing gender in the exact way that they deem fit, we'll always be seen as an other in their eyes, and no amount of hormones and surgeries will change that. Transphobic propaganda, or really any propaganda, is usually built on fear. Men in dresses are going to invade women's spaces, are going to prey on real women in bathrooms and changing rooms. Trans men are insane perverts who get off on playing dress up and having your little girls call them ma'am. God, even just typing that had made me feel disgusting. But the problem is that this fear-mongering is built on one, the idea that trans women aren't really the gender they say they are and the only reason that they would transition is to infiltrate women's spaces, and two, that women, real women, must be protected at all costs from these men posing as women. And when you frame it like that, it's kind of easy to see how trans men don't quite fit into this narrative. If we assume that trans men aren't really men, they're really women posing as men, why would they do that? And if they're really women in need of protection, what are we protecting them from? We need something to fear here, something to scare us. Otherwise, our teeny-weeny transphobe brains won't have a reason to needlessly hate someone for existing. So, TERFs like J.K. Rowling decided to use their big brains to deliver a new, hot and ready transphobic narrative to serve to anyone who wants to protect women while simultaneously hating trans people. Okay, I've been throwing around the term TERF a lot, and though I think that if you clicked on this video, you probably already have a good idea of what that is. If you don't know, TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, or as I like to call them, fake feminists. TERFs weaponize feminism, using it as both a sword to wield against trans people and a shield to ward off any criticism one could have on their potential discrimination. Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who is afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying, to a hitherto totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer again because they're allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. It doesn't take much to pull back the thin veil of empathy and see that this is an obvious manipulation tactic. Rowling frames TERFs as worried parents, afraid that transness is going to be forced on their child and sickened by the fact that men can enter into women's changing rooms. It also makes me chuckle that she said a hetero totally unfeminist older lady, like it's absurd to think that people would say that you aren't a feminist when you're literally angry that women can use the same dressing rooms that you can. Also, the example she gave was oddly specific. Like, JK, did you get kicked out of a Marks and Spencer because you didn't like that a trans woman was trying on clothing, so you made a scene? Are you good? Do you need to talk to somebody? But the phrase I really wanted to address here was the mother of a gay child who was afraid their child would want to transition to escape homophobic bullying. Because this is where Rowling takes her first strike at trans men. Trans men are really just lesbian women, transitioning because it's easier to date women as a man than it is to date them as a woman. But, I think there's one huge problem with that assumption, JK. I'm fucking gay, JK. I have no desire to date women, and I didn't identify as a lesbian before I came out. Yet here I am, with the guys, being dudes. This is not a new idea in the slightest. After I came out, many of my cis friends just assumed that I would be a straight guy even though I had crushes on several dudes beforehand. I think this is due to their ingrained heteronormativity. People assume that we transition because we want to assimilate manhood or womanhood, not because we are the gender that we say we are. So it completely baffles them when we go and do something that isn't traditionally masculine or feminine. But I digress. JK, make this make sense. You go and write a whole essay about how trans men and women aren't real and spread propaganda against trans people, and then assume that a lesbian child would have it easier than a trans one? Though trans men aren't seen as dangerous, we are often rejected from both men and women's spaces. We're often left feeling isolated, like we don't belong anywhere. Trans men are bullied, beaten, and sometimes rejected from their own families. Being a trans man doesn't just make bullying go away, it amplifies it. If someone is looking to escape homophobic bullying, they're probably not going to become something that people still feel the need to openly debate. Oh, but J.K. Rowling has the perfect defense against anybody who calls out her faux feminism.
Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women.
Are you dead ass? That has to be one of the most pathetic and ass-backwards attempts to deflect criticism I have ever heard. I have to ask though, what exactly does JK mean when she says that TERFs include trans men in their feminism? Is she saying that TERFs are also fighting for the rights of trans men? Wait, that can't be it, because she just implied that trans men are really just lesbian women escaping homophobia and then felt the need to say that we were born women. What could that possibly mean? Look, I'm not gonna say I don't have some experiences that overlap with a woman's. I've been accosted on the street. I've been followed for blocks by creepy men. I've been told I was overly emotional. I've been told to shut up. I have definitely experienced some of the things that modern day feminism fights against. However, these experiences and my transness often go hand in hand. When people commented on my body, it wasn't just distressing because I was young and feminine. There was also the added layer that I didn't like the feminine aspects of my body, so someone commenting on it made me feel physically ill. My experiences as someone femininely presenting and my experiences as a trans man often intertwine in a way that feminism by itself can't unpack. Not only that, but since I've been on T, I'm not really treated by society as a woman anymore. Though I still have my memories and trauma from the before times, I find myself further and further on the outside of women's issues. I don't get catcalled anymore. I don't have things mansplained to me anymore. In fact, I often find myself having to undo a lot of the traits that toxic masculinity taught me early on in my transition. My experiences as of now align more with that of a man than it does with that of a woman. If you're including trans men in your feminism just because we were born women, you're attempting to boil us down to our sex described at birth. In other words, you're literally just calling us a woman. So yeah, you're trans exclusionary. So we're starting to get an idea of what we should fear when it comes to trans men, but we don't quite have a real beast yet. Sure, I'm a little scared of my future daughter transitioning because the girls at school told her that she gives off big lesbian energy, but I'm not just gonna grab my torch and pitchfork and scream at the next trans person I see on.
I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning. returning to their original sex because they regret taking steps that have, in some cases, altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility.
They're tricking our little girls into being sterile? Jared, where the fuck is the fresh torch? Sure, I could go into the fact that the detransition rate is less than 1%, or the fact that JK seems to think that HRT changes your sex, but I'm sure you've heard that all before. Detransitioning happens, and it can definitely leave some irreversible changes, but you're informed of all these changes before you even take your first shot. It was the patient's choice to go through with these changes, and to frame it as though some nebulous outside force was pushing them into it takes away any agency that those who pursue HRT have. What I find really fascinating is this focus on fertility. Why is it that the absolute worst thing that J.K. Rowling can think of is the loss of ability to bear children? There's a clash between the modern feminist ideas that Rowling claims to represent and the rigid and outdated version of womanhood that Rowling seeks to prop up. It shouldn't matter whether or not someone who detransitions has lost their fertility. To put so much emphasis on it and frame it as a tragedy kinda seems like you're reducing women to their ability to have babies. You believe that the pinnacle of womanhood is bearing children, the idea that someone would do something to their bodies that may permanently stop them from doing so is distressing. Or at least it would be if Rowling wasn't doing this just to demonize trans care. You don't see her talking about women going out to get their tubes tied or getting hysterectomies. She only used the loss of fertility after she framed HRT as something being pushed by this evil outside force, making it seem like people who are pursuing T are getting sterilized without their knowledge. She made it seem like we were tricked, we were ignorant to the effects that T would have on our bodies. Otherwise, why would we pursue it? The only other explanation is that we must be going crazy.
The writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. The more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, disassociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether, if I had been born 30 years later, I too might have tried to transition.
Aw, JK, you think I'm sensitive and clever? You're gonna make me blush. But seriously, sis, you're starting to piss me the fuck off. First off, trans men in HRT existed 30 years ago. Though it was hard to get trans care unless you were actively seeking it out, let's not pretend like being transgender and medically transitioning just became a thing when Gen Z kids grew old enough to do TikTok dances. Second, fuck you. Gender dysphoria is not the same thing as any other mental illness. Though it often works closely with anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and disassociation, simply being neurodivergent is not going to make you suddenly want to jump onto HRT. I myself suffer from anxiety, panic disorder, and depression, and even though I can't speak for every trans person in existence, my mental illness, my trauma, and my gender dysphoria were always treated as three separate yet cohabitated entities. They each can have an effect on one another, but they aren't all the same thing. By bringing mental illness into discussion, JK seeks to delegitimize the experiences of trans men by equating our transness with mental illness. It's not that you're a man, it's your anxiety telling you that. It's your depression telling you that. Hell, if I was born 30 years later, bitch, I may have tried to transition too. This is not just an insult to trans people, it's an insult to neurodivergent people. You are framing anybody who is neurodivergent as people who can't possibly be responsible for their own decisions. You're gaslighting us, saying that you know us better than we know ourselves, and the reason for that is because we have mental illness or are neurodivergent. And I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. She later goes down the line to equate transitioning with autism. Sis got like mad unpacking to do. Like, this shit is a lot. You might also notice that the "you're mentally unstable and not trans" argument is very similar to the rhetoric used to delegitimize trans women. It's just that instead of saying we're mentally unstable and therefore dangerous, she's saying we're mentally unstable and therefore pitiful. In her eyes, we're still women, fragile and broken women in need of protection, but women nonetheless, because she low-key, high-key still thinks that women are weak-minded and in need of guidance, but y'all ain't ready for that one. Where trans women are seen as deviants, trans men are seen as victims. But victims of what? I bet y'all are expecting that I'm saying that the monster that Rowling is talking about is the huge monolith known as transgenderism, because unless transphobes turn us into this weird cult-like religion, they feel that they can't argue against us because transgender is an identity and not an opinion. And yeah, I think that's part of it, like the big toe, or like the arm, or like maybe the whole ass monster. Being transgender as a concept is exactly what J.K. Rowling is trying to turn to a monster. In her eyes, it's this sort of vampire that feeds off the insecurities of young women and turns them into one themselves. And acceptance is just as good as offering your kid up to them. Because once you start listening to trans people, once you start having an open mind, once you try to have an ounce of empathy and understanding of the trans experience, then men are going into women's toilets. Young women are being tricked into being sterilized by going on HRT. Mentally ill people are being told that being trans is the key to their happiness, and we suddenly live in a world where sex just doesn't exist. God forbid. Here's the thing though, when I list out all of the bullshit that J.K. Rowling is saying, I kind of sound like Alex Jones. It's conspiratorial leaps that sound actually insane and only seek to scare women, especially mothers, into thinking that transgender Dracula's coming for their daughters. But bitch, I saw being human. If I want to be an immortal sterile femboy who destroys gender norms for the rest of eternity, let me rock. Oh, we asked you to write books on wizards, not essays about issues that in no way affect you. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe down below if you want more videos of me talking about things that I care about. Also, follow me on social media if you want to know more about my personal life, or if you just want to harass me to make videos quicker. This is TMG, signing out. Peace.